Hey, look, my shirt matches my slide. I'm coordinated. All right, cool. Yeah, we're doing all these little short lectures in this chapter, and I'm kind of liking this. So here's another one. And this one's just, I really want to situate behaviorism, what you're going to see here, and I also want to humanize things a little bit. So I've already given you some of the historical context for this, but it was really Watson. So Pavlov kind of did his thing, but he just kind of did his thing. He wasn't so, I'll call it political, science political. He wasn't so wrapped up in the whole nature nurture kind of thing. He just did these experiments in a way that he thought was rational and that allowed him to study, learning in the dogs that he was working with. But as he did so, it was really Watson watching Pavlov, seeing Pavlov's work, learning of Pavlov's work, who said, oh, that's the way to do psychology. So first of all, let me be clear about the following. Pavlov was studying learning, and learning has become just critical to what psychology is about. Learning is how we change over time, right? Watson saw what Pavlov is doing, and he was saying, you are capturing learning in progress. That is real science. Now, what did Pavlov do? He really, played with stimuli, conditioned stimuli, unconditioned stimuli, and responses. Pavlov had kind of reduced the world to, okay, an animal is in a certain situation and we can manipulate that situation, and then the animal behaves a certain way and we can record that behavior and measure it. And then we can learn how the stimulus and the response are connected. And John B. Watson thought, this is good science. Now, two other things to be aware of that were kind of going on. First of all, clinical psychology had kind of taken off and become a powerhouse. But to a lot of experimental psychologists, clinical psychology was not experimental. And so they were trying to be more experimental. They wanted to be very experimental as a reaction to Freud and all that he said. And then there's Pavlov showing a way to be experimental. And in a sense, as you'll see, that way involved reducing what you were studying, reducing the sort of world of the science. And it was John B. Watson who really clarified that argument and strengthened it a little bit. So let me now kind of walk you through that then. Let's start with this famous quote. Give me a dozen healthy infants, well-formed, in my own specified world to bring them up in. So he wants to be able to control the whole environment of these children. If I can control their environment, then I'll guarantee to take any one of them at random and train him to become any kind of specialist I might select. Doctor, lawyer, artist, merchant chief, and yes, even beggarman and thief. Regardless of his talents, okay, think nature here, right? Regardless of his talents, his penchants, his tendencies, his abilities, his vocations, and the race of his ancestors, he's saying, I don't care about this person's background. Just let me take this person from a baby and control their environment, and I can make this person anything I want. Now, some of this is in the textbook, but they didn't include this last bit, which I think is very important just to show the mindset. I am going beyond my facts, and I admit it. So what he's saying is, I haven't proven this. I haven't actually done this, but I'm going, so I'm going beyond my facts, and I admit it. But so have the advocates of the contrary. They have been doing it for many thousands of years. The contrary. What is the contrary? It's the nature people. It's the Darwins. It's the geneticists. And so this is him explicitly saying, hey, those people who've been talking in sort of evolutionary terms and suggesting that everything we are is the result of the genes that we've inherited, he thinks they've gone way too extreme. And so he's countering it with extreme. He's saying, no, let me give you an extreme nurture argument, that it's all about the things that we experience in life. So, this quote in its fullness really shows one of the motivators for John Watson, and it was the revenge of nature. The revenge of nurture. It's so hard to. Those words are so similar, right? You really got to think. So the revenge of nurture. He wanted to show that the things that happen to us in life are very, very critical to the people we become. So I want to bring this and talk about the little Albert experiment that you've learned about. And one of the thoughts I had when I first heard about it is, why would he make this poor little baby afraid of everything, right? Afraid of all these furry little animals. Why did he choose to condition fear? Why fear? It seems unethical. If you watch some of those videos, and you can see them on YouTube, if you have a baby in your household and somebody said, hey, can we do this with your baby? You'd say, like, no way, man. You're not doing this to my kid. You're not going to make my kid scared of almost everything. Now, as the textbook suggests, they did plan on trying to eliminate the fears once they created them. That can be hard to do, by the way. But they never got around to it. Little Albert got whisked away before they could do that. So why would you do that? Well, it's really related to this argument. Watson felt that emotions, so many people thought our emotions are so primitive, and they are, right? They come from our limbic system. It is the primitive part of our brain. And so Watson wanted to show that if I, through environment, through things that happen in the environment, if I can make a baby fear something that it didn't initially fear, if I can literally create a fear response out of nothing, then even strong emotions like fear are not purely genetically determined. They can be behaviorally determined. They can be, environmentally determined. You can learn to fear things because of things that happen to you in your life. So even the really core of our emotional states can respond to learning in the environment. And so that's why he chose fear. Okay. Now, let's get back to the issue of sort of the experimental approach. Again, what Watson did was very close to what Pavlov did, right? He basically associated with his little gong and with his loud noise behind the baby's head. He associated some animal with something that produced a fear response. That loud noise produced a fear response. So he's sort of doing a Pavlovian type conditioning experiment here of a sort. And again, he became very enamored with this. He thought you can learn a lot and you can demonstrate a lot, even when all you do is manipulate the environment of somebody and you then record their behavior. This came to be called SR psychology, thanks to the next character we meet, Skinner. It's also known as rat psychology. Obviously, Watson is not working with rats here. He's working with children. But that notion that, psychology is so difficult to study because we keep studying things we can't directly measure. This goes back to that soft science thing, right? Like memory, like consciousness, like perception, like attention. And so Watson started to become a strong proponent of this sort of view. The behaviorist cannot find consciousness in the test tube of his science. So people who started ascribing to these views became known as behaviorists because they were interested in studying behavior. Why behavior? Because you could see it and you can measure it. You can't see memory. You can't see attention. You can't see consciousness. And so with the behaviorists, we see this rise of an attitude that says, psychology should not study that which it cannot see and observe directly. Okay, so suddenly there was this almost a banning from the psychological science from the 1940s all the way through to the 60s, more from the 20s and 30s up to the 60s. When this behaviorism rose, there was this banning of any studies of consciousness, memory, or whatever. They were just seen as pseudoscience, not worth it. If you want to be a real scientist in psychology, you need to be a behaviorist. And in the American context, almost every psychologist was a behaviorist. In fact, when I went to my undergraduate in the late 1980s, at University of New Brunswick, At that point, about half the faculty were still behaviorists. They'd been hired during the 40s and 50s, and they were still around, many of them, and they were behaviorists because that's what everybody was hiring. Okay, so we just had a whole chapter on consciousness, and I talked to you about the experiments that we've done and what we've kind of learned. But to the behaviorists, those experiments, they happened after the behaviorism thing. I'm going to have to tell you the rest of the story, so we'll get to the cognitive psychology part. But at this point in time, there was like, no, let's not study that stuff. Let's study behavior and how it responds to environmental changes. So stimuli, responses. A very restricted view of what would be considered psychology. And you're going to see that continue with Skinner, who believes this even more strongly, perhaps, than Watson. So Watson was the one, I see as sort of in the middle, watching Pavlov and sort of becoming enamored with the cleanliness of his scientific method. With the precision and the neatness of measurement. And so he started espousing this, I should say, and telling people, hey, this is the way we should do things. And then that led to a whole army of behaviorists who largely did things the way that Watson said they should be done. And so Watson was the person that kind of elucidated this new way of science, new way of psychology, I should say, that many others that you'll learn about follow. Okay. So, those are the sort of key points of Watson. A, revenge of nurture. B, restricting what is psychology to SR kind of stuff. At his time, that was very big. Now there's a little bit of the rest of the story, and I always like the rest of the story because it humanizes these people a little bit. And for Watson, it's an interesting rest of the story. It's a scandalous rest of the story, and scandals are always kind of fun, I guess, to think about. So this was 1950s-ish, at where we're at, and that was a very prim and proper time in America at that time. And Watson had an affair with Rayner. So you see all this Watson and Rayner stuff in your textbook, and they co-published the Little Albert and all that kind of stuff. She was an undergraduate at the time, and he was a professor, and they became romantically involved. And you can kind of see the age difference in a sense there. This was scandalous. In fact, it was so scandalous that he was forced to leave his professorship. And so he did. He left his professorship and he went into advertising, and he became very successful in advertising. In fact, in that previous section when we talked about that indirect route of persuasion, where you associate things with, if you want somebody to like your product, associate it with something they already like, an actor they like, an adventurous kind of scene, something like that. Well, a lot of that pathway of advertising started with Watson. He understood all these principles of learning. He understood how you could control human behavior. And that's what a lot of people in the psychology, sort of consumer psychology, that's what they study, how to manipulate humans to like and buy your products. And yeah, a lot of that, what you now see in the advertising world started with this guy as well, because he was forced out of academia and used his creativity and approach in a different context. Kind of interesting, There you go. There's the story of John B. Watson. We'll go on from there and talk about some other interesting figures and how behaviorism kind of grew as a result of Watson's influence. Cool. Bye-bye.